Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Animas Corporation, providing insulin delivery products for people living with diabetes and part of the One Touch family. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes with the world's first continuous glucose monitoring system that sends glucose readings directly to your compatible smart device. Live life on your own terms with Dexcom. Hey, it's Stacey. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, checking in with Ed Damiano, creator of the Bionic Pancreas, an artificial pancreas system that adapts to you instead of the other way around.
It's a system that does not require input beyond your body weight. It doesn't require even that you interact with the device beyond maintaining it and making sure the batteries are charged and the cartridges are full, the infusion sets are changed and sensors been changed properly. But it's a system that does not require that you make decisions about your glycemia, that the provider know anything about your total daily dose of insulin or basal rates or carb to insulin ratios.
We'll talk about what that means, how it all works, including why Ed started a very unique company as part of his Bionic Pancreas project. And of course, the timeline. When can we get this? Plus, just back from the HealthEVoices Conference, I'll share some of what I learned there. And this episode marks a big milestone, 100 weekly episodes. It all starts now on Diabetes Connections. Welcome. Glad to have you along this week. If you're new to the show, hi, I'm Stacey. And here on Diabetes Connections, we educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes, sharing stories of connections from celebrities, leaders, and advocates in our community, as well as the healthcare companies and the technology folks that we rely on. I also like to talk to people who aren't inventing amazing devices like the Bionic Pancreas or going up Mount Everest and running marathons with type 1, but just living day to day with this crazy condition. So I hope you got a chance to join me yesterday on Facebook Live for the Ask Me Anything I did. You can go back and look at that. Of course, it'll be right on the Diabetes Connections Facebook page, and it will come out as a bonus podcast episode soon. Now, I did that to mark 100 episodes. This right here is the 100th regularly scheduled episode of Diabetes Connections. I've done a couple of bonus episodes here and there, but this is 100. And thank you so much for being here and for being the reason that I achieved that milestone. I just want to take a minute and talk about that because when I started the show in June of 2015, this was an idea I had for a long time. I have a radio background and I wanted to do a diabetes podcast, but it just took a while to get it going. It took, frankly, I needed some confidence that I could take care of the technical part. I have always been in front of the microphone, in front of the camera when I worked in local TV news, and I didn't have a lot of technical know-how. So, thanks to a lot of people in the diabetes community, frankly, and in the podcast community, I did a bunch of research and found that I could do this. So I've made some mistakes along the way, but man, 100 episodes. I am really excited to be at this milestone, and it is just the beginning. I think like blogging in a way, a lot of people start out blogging as I did because we got to get it out of our heads. We're really blogging for ourselves. It's great if it's helping somebody else, but it's something that we just feel like we have to do. That's how I feel about podcasting now. I can't believe when I hear from people all over the US and then, in Australia and the UK, and I have people in Europe and Africa listening. It's crazy. But when I hear that the podcast helped somebody, I hear from endocrinologists that are recommending it for the people they see. That is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for spreading the word, for being here, for helping me tell other people's stories, for bringing the information that we all need. I so appreciate it. All right, so here's a quick word from our sponsor, who's been with me from the beginning and helps make a lot of this possible, Animas. I love working with Animas, you know that. And after nearly 10 years, I love my son's Animas insulin pump. I met a lot of advocates recently at the HealthEVoices event. I'm going to be talking about that coming up. And it's always great to talk about the Animas experience with people who have type 1. You know, Animas offers a choice of insulin pumps. You can choose the one that's right for you or for your child. And with kids, it is great that the Animas pumps really fit an active lifestyle. I love talking about our experience with Animas. They make it easy with great products and incredible customer service. To find out more about Animas, just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Animas, part of the One Touch family logo. So I'm just back from that HealthEVoices conference I was talking about. It's a very unique conference because it brings together online health advocates representing different health communities. So I've been to several diabetes conferences over the past several years, but HealthEVoices is about bringing together different communities to learn how to better advocate online. So they had several people from the diabetes community, but they also had people from, cancer communities, HIV, IBD, different types of health communities were represented there. It is sponsored by Janssen Pharmaceuticals, which is part of Johnson & Johnson. And I just need to tell you about this disclaimer that Janssen did pay for all of my travel expenses, but all thoughts and opinions are my own and not reflective of those held by Janssen. And I did post that on social media before I went, as they had requested that we all do. But I just want to say a little bit about that. The takeaway that I got from this conference, where we learned from representatives from Facebook and YouTube, how to strengthen your voice online. But the takeaway I got is that your voice is important. And yeah, I'm talking to you as you listen. There are some amazing advocates out there for so many different health issues and conditions. And not all of them are big mouths like me, are comfortable with speaking up. But they decided they wanted or they needed to be heard. So they found a way. And I hope you find a way to make your voice heard. It doesn't have to be with a podcast or a blog or even publicly, but know that your voice is valid. Your health condition, your role as a caretaker, whatever it is, that is important. And you don't have to be loud. You just have to be real. So I hope that you know that your voice is just as important as anybody else's. And if you choose to make it loud, that's great. But if you choose to advocate just to one person, a friend, your kid's teacher, that's okay too. It was a really interesting conference, and I'll be sharing more about what I've learned, I'm sure, whether it's by acknowledging HealthEVoices or by just doing it over the next year. I'll definitely be sharing more of that. And one thing I know that I'll be doing more of is video. Lord help me. So look for more of that in the months to come. You know why I hate video? I think it's because of all of my years as a TV reporter. I feel like if I don't have my full TV makeup on, that I can't do it. So I got to get over that. Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about Dexcom, another one of our great sponsors. I am trying to raise my kids with independence, confidence, and responsibility. And I was pleasantly surprised that using the share function of the Dexcom system helps with that. Using the separate Dexcom Follow app, we can help Benny manage diabetes in real time. At school, at a friend's, at a sleepover, overnight school field trip, and that gives us peace of mind and helps him feel like diabetes isn't holding him back. With the Dexcom G5 mobile CGM system, dynamic glucose data can be accessed and shared safely and conveniently anywhere, anytime to your compatible smart device as long as there's an internet connection. The Dexcom G5 Mobile is the only CGM approved for adults and children ages 2 and older with diabetes. Do not make treatment decisions based on share and follow readings. Always confirm with your compatible smart device or Dexcom receiver. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week has become a bit of a rock star in the diabetes community. I am not kidding. If you have ever seen Ed Damiano speak or appear at a conference, he is mobbed. And here's why. Ed's son David was diagnosed as an infant before he turned 1. Ed has devoted his life since that time to creating and bringing to market an artificial pancreas system that is adaptive, that is smart, and that takes the mental burden off people with diabetes. That device is now called the iLet, a play on words, all of our I devices, and named after the islets of Langerhans. That's the insulin-producing tissue They do a little bit more than that in the pancreas. Quick trivia, they are named after the German pathologist Paul Langerhans, who discovered them in 1869. These cells sit in groups that Langerhans himself likened to little islands in the pancreas. So that's how the iLet got its name. So in the summer of 2015, Ed Damiano showed up at the Friends for Life conference, that big diabetes conference that happens in the summer, with the first version of the iLet. And it was pretty amazing to see that. You know, we could hold it in our hands and just ooh and ah at that. And then last year, around this same time, he showed me the next slightly smaller version. It is pretty heady stuff to hold a device like this in your hand. As you'll hear Ed discuss, the iLet is a pump and a CGM system. It uses Dexcom, but the pump will use insulin and glucagon both to better manage highs and lows. The first version of the iLet will not have the glucagon. We talk about that as well. The biggest difference between the Bionic Pancreas, and that's what the iLet system is known by, the Bionic Pancreas, and the hybrid closed loop systems that you've been hearing a lot about and are coming out, Medtronic system that's coming out this year. The Bionic Pancreas, the iLet, is an actual closed loop. You put your body weight in, and that's it. No basal rates, no insulin to carb ratios to come up with. That is it. Right? How crazy is that? All right, here's my interview with Beta Bionics, Ed Damiano. Ed, thanks so much for joining me today. I cannot believe it's been only a year since we last spoke. It seems like longer because so much is happening. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Thank you, Stacey. I'm doing very well.
So there's so much to talk about today. Want to talk about your company, your progress, your son. Can you start, though, by just giving us an update, kind of a where we stand right now in terms of the Bionic Pancreas?
Absolutely. Stacey, I can't believe it's been just a year since we spoke. I really thought it was longer than that, because I think that's indicative of how much we're getting done from year to year. My son's blood sugar. Sorry about that. That was the Dexcom beeping. But anyway, yeah, I can't believe, how much has happened in a 12-month period. It's a very good sign, I think, when you look back on things and they seem further in the past than they actually are, because it means you're filling the time with very, active moments one after the next. It's like a steady stream of activity, which is very good. And it's been very positive progress. We are, as you know, building a fully integrated Bionic Pancreas. And this is a system that can infuse just insulin automatically, just glucagon automatically, or both insulin and glucagon, what we call the bihormonal configuration. And it's really being designed, as I say, like 3 devices in one, to treat different chronic diseases, different conditions of glycemic dysregulation, we call it, diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, patients who've had pancreatectomies, people who have chronic hypoglycemia, who might not need insulin therapy but need chronic glucagon therapy. So we see many different related conditions, all related through blood sugar control, that this device will treat. And we call the device the iLet, in homage to the islets of Langerhans that secrete insulin and glucagon in the pancreas. And it's a handheld device about the size of the old smartphones that we are used to from about 10 years ago. The iPhone, original iPhone, that size, a little bit thicker because it's got drug cartridges in it. It is a tube pump, so it's not a patch pump like the Insulet Omnipod. So you do wear it, close to your body with two tubes if it's in the bihormonal configuration, or one tube if it's in insulin-only or glucagon-only configuration. It has a Bluetooth radio, and the tubing, of course, is to deliver the drug through a standard infusion set, but it's an infusion set of our own design. So we've made our own infusion set. We have a dual cannula infusion set for the 2-hormone configuration, and we have separate single cannula infusion sets for insulin and glucagon, and those sets are designed very specially for this application so that you can't cross-channel drug and make any mistakes with inadvertently putting the glucagon cartridge into the insulin chamber or vice versa. So that required thinking through the entire device platform as well as the actual infusion set. And the device itself, has this tubing set and drug cartridges that you drop into the system, but it's also got, integrated firmware on the device, its own touchscreen display with a low-light backlight for low-light conditions. And it's got all the mathematical algorithms that we've been developing and testing over the past 10 years in animal studies and clinical trials integrated right into the device. It has a low-energy Bluetooth radio built into it to communicate with a continuous glucose monitor. And the system does not require cell phone support or any kind of internet connectivity. So it's a standalone, fully integrated medical device that can communicate with a smartphone should you choose to do so. So we'll have our own little app that will talk to the iLet so that you could look at the status of the device on your phone, and so that you could stream data that's being generated by the device through your smartphone to a cloud service, much in the same way that the Apple Watch works with a paired iPhone. The iLet would be paired to your phone and then communicate to a cloud service. But again, that's not required for normal operation. That's mainly there for sharing data with others if you care to do so. So it is truly a standalone system in that sense.
I have so many questions. Let me start with when you mentioned the inset that you all have developed with cannulas for glucagon and for insulin. How big is that? And explain to me, as a real layperson, how far apart those have to be to not interfere with each other.
Oh, very good point. So these infusion sets that we've designed are a little bit smaller in terms of the surface area on the skin, a little bit smaller than what you might be used to for a standard insulin infusion set, but not much smaller because you still have to be able to get your fingers on it, to be able to connect it and disconnect it. But they do sit right next to each other. And first of all, if it's an insulin-only or glucagon-only configuration, there's just one. So it uses probably a little bit less real estate than the average infusion set that's out there right now, but not much different from that. But if you insert the dual cannula set, you actually insert both needles simultaneously. And when you remove the inserter, what's left behind are two needles under the skin that are about 1 centimeter apart. It's a distance we thought was pretty safe, somewhere between 1 and 1.5 centimeters apart. Safe I shouldn't say safe, but that is effective from a human factors standpoint. You can get your fingers in between the two and disconnect those infusion sets separately. So you insert the dual cannula infusion set with one insertion, remove the inserter, but then those infusion sets are completely decoupled from one another. So you can disconnect one, but not necessarily the other. So you can disconnect one or the other, or both together, but you don't have to disconnect both of them if you don't want to.
That's
so if you want to just disconnect the insulin, you can do that. And the reason for that is because you may find that your insulin cartridge has gone empty before your glucagon cartridge, or vice versa, and you don't want to change both of them, nor do you want to change both cartridges. You don't want to change both infusion sets. You don't want to change both cartridges. You only change cartridges as you need to, or once we have an intended period of use. We're looking for a 6-day indication for use for the insulin cartridge and the glucagon cartridge. So if you don't want to exceed that, then you would change them out, whether it's empty or not. But the timing might not be the same on the insulin and the glucagon cartridge, and they shouldn't be connected in that way. They empty when they empty. Their 6-day period runs out when it runs out. So you should be able to change them independently of one another. So the infusion sets you can disconnect separately. The other thing that's a little different about, this is a bit of a subtlety, but the difference about the way we do things with our system is that the infusion set, we want you to change every 2 to 3 days. So this is a system where they are needle cannulas. So our first infusion set out of the starting box is going to be stainless steel, 29 gauge needles, about 6 millimeters or 9 millimeters in length, depending on what, how deep you want to insert the infusion set, and that varies from person to person. But that still requires a routine change out because infusion sets, as being what they are, the adhesives begin to fail after a few days, and you're tugging on them with tubing and everything. It does require changing it out every 2 to 3 days. So we'll look for like a 3-day indication for use on the sets. But the cartridges and the tubing, we're hoping to get a 6-day indication for use. So we're doing biocompatibility work to get that kind of a longer-term interaction with the longer-term usage of the device, of the cartridges in the device. We are using glass cartridges for both insulin and glucagon. And the idea is that some people will be able to get longer life out of a tubing and cartridge than out of an infusion set, so they should change on different schedules. Change the tubing and cartridges you need to, or every 6 days. Change the infusion set every 2 to 3 days, so we'll package them separately. The tubing will be packaged separately from the needle site. And that's what I've done with my son all these years. I change the infusion set, and now he does, but every 2 to 3 days. but the cartridge you change only as needed. In his case now, he's a teenager. He changes cartridge more often than the infusion set because he uses so much insulin. But when he was, when he's younger, he goes separately.
Yeah, we're in the exact same boat. We're in the exact same boat. I've always changed the inset and the cartridge separately. And because when he was little, he used, tiny amounts of insulin. Now he's
2 weeks.
Yeah.
He got 2 weeks. So I wouldn't use the cartridge,
And now it's ridiculous. Wow.
Right. Because he's a teenager, so he uses so much insulin. But I've always seen those things as they shouldn't be on the same schedule. And what I've heard people tend to do with standard insulin pumps is they'll often not change the needle site because they haven't run out of insulin. And so that's not a good idea because the needle site needs to be changed because it starts to perform poorly after too many days,
Oh, yeah.
And they'll just try and milk it. And you really want to encourage people to change the needle site. So we're actually going to package them separately. We think that makes more sense.
Yeah.
More flexibility.
Sure. And with the glucagon, can you talk a little bit about the challenges there? Because getting that to be stable seemed to be one of the big challenges when you first started talking about a dual chamber pump. How's the progress going?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So there's not one way to stabilize glucagon or glucagon-like drugs, analogs. There's many different ways to go about doing this. And I don't want to minimize the challenges that are inherent to that, of which there are many. But what we also have are some significant efforts in pharmaceutical companies which have been going on for literally years on this matter. And many solutions have been developed that are very promising, and some are quite far along in the development pipeline. So, for example, Lilly has a glucagon analog that they're developing, so it's not actual glucagon, right? It's an analog molecule that is like glucagon. And just like the Humalog and the Novolog, which is an insulin analog, they've changed the amino acid sequence somewhat to stabilize the drug and also to allow it to be absorbed more rapidly on the skin. Similarly, companies like Zealand and Lilly have come up with ways to change the glucagon molecule slightly so that it is also stable in solution like insulin, and as stable in solution, generally speaking, as insulin, but also has very similar absorption kinetics to human glucagon. Wow. So it's a similar molecule, and it binds to the same receptors on the liver that the human glucagon molecule does, but it's stable in liquid solution. So you don't have to mix it, and you can sell it in pre-filled cartridges. So that's we're working with Zealand right now on a clinical trial. My clinical collaborator, Stephen Russell, is using the iPhone version of our Bionic Pancreas, doing a phase 2A study. We've been calling it, the folks at Zealand called this a phase 2A study. They've got another phase 2A study looking at the absorption kinetics of their analog. But Stephen Russell is using the Bionic Pancreas to test Zealand's glucagon analog in people with type 1 diabetes in an outpatient setting or home use settings. First time ever, as far as I know, there's been a Bionic Pancreas study, a bihormonal Bionic Pancreas study in the outpatient setting where you're using a real stable glucagon analog. It's never been done before. That study finishes this month. So we're hoping to have the data from both of those phase 2A studies before the middle of the year, before June. And we are also going to go into what's called a phase 2B study, testing this glucagon analog in our iLet. So we're hoping to have that package in front of the FDA so that we can begin that study by the end of the year. We'd like to have that in front of the FDA. So we'd like to do that bihormonal study with the actual iLet instead of just when I talk about the Bionic Pancreas, we have a current system that we've been using for the past 4.5 years, which runs on an iPhone, and it uses tandem t:slim pumps. And it's the system that was never intended to be a commercial system. It's an investigational device. And that uses, like as I say, iPhone technology. We are migrating away from that to the iLet, the fully integrated system that's independent of cellular technology. And that system we're going to be bringing out into clinical trials this year in the insulin-only configuration and the very beginning of next year in the bihormonal configuration. So we'll be moving from the iPhone platform to the iLet Pro platform in the next few months.
So the pictures that we've seen in the last couple of years, including I think a camp, like a pediatric study with a couple of different insets on someone's body. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was, one for glucagon, one for insulin, one for different pumps. You're moving away from that. And we'll put pictures of all of this so you can see it. That's really, it's fascinating to see how it's moving. I'll put pictures at diabetes-connections.com so you can see it.
You see those pictures, it looks rather cumbersome because you have two separate insulin pumps. One's delivering insulin, one's being repurposed to deliver glucagon. And the pump that's delivering glucagon is delivering actually the Lilly glucagon, the old Lilly glucagon that we're all used to having that's in these rescue kits, not their new technologies they're working on in development, but the old Lilly glucagon kits that you have to mix into solution every day. That was never a practical solution, not one we ever expected to move forward with. It allowed us to do the clinical trials. But when you look at those systems on the kids, they're very cumbersome. You've got an iPhone. It had an old continuous glucose monitor receiver unit, the Dexcom G4 system, and it had two pumps, and it had these two separate infusion sets, and even the sets they used were these sets that had two sites on them each. So they had like four adhesives. They really looked, and then they had a sensor on there, so it was using a lot of skin real estate.
It was bigger than the
whereas
kids.
This iLet is going to be much more streamlined.
All right, so
it won't look like that.
No, of course not. Of course not. I'll probably ask you this a few different ways before I let you go, but I'll start now. So when are we getting this? I know that you mentioned the insulin-only version should go for the FDA clinical trials later this year. When do you expect to submit for approval?
So we have to do what's called a pivotal trial. So the iLet is going to go out for its first outpatient study this year, and then the pivotal trial will be next year. My goal, of course, going back over the years, was to get this done by the time my son goes to college, but that's only 5 months away. And my hope actually then was for him to go to school with the bihormonal system, which is definitely not going to happen, nor will he be able to wear the iLet, unfortunately, when he goes to college in 5 months. So I didn't meet my deadline as hoped, but I also wasn't expecting to build a whole device, with my team from soup to nuts. I thought we were going to be able to license out the mathematical algorithms and have a company build it into their system and commercialize it. So we had to build a lot more infrastructure than I ever anticipated. But the timing looks like we'll be doing the insulin-only study this year. The first one will be called a bridging study, and then the insulin-only pivotal trial next year. The bihormonal pivotal trial, we've raised a fair amount of resources from the NIH. We've raised about $12 million from the NIH recently, back in September, to fund the adult portion of the bihormonal pivotal trial. So that's a study that we would expect to begin at the end of next year. And that study is a longer study than the insulin-only study. So the bihormonal system is probably a year to 2 years behind the insulin-only study. So whereas I'm not going to be able to get the insulin-only system on my son for his freshman year in college, I'm hoping he'll be able to use it in his sophomore year. Bihormonal system, I don't think he'll see it till his senior year. So I think it's going to be, 1 to 2 years behind the insulin-only system. He'll be an adult, so the bihormonal system will come out in adults first, because when it comes to introducing a new drug, you roll these things out typically in stages where you introduce the product in adults first before you bring it to pediatrics. Whereas with the insulin-only system, we don't have to do that. We have some really compelling data from our old iPhone system in pediatrics, in the camp setting, both teenagers and preteens, showing how well the system works in both age groups. So we actually are planning to do the insulin-only pivotal trial in all age groups.
Oh, wonderful!
And that's something you don't typically see. Yeah, so we're gonna make sure that this study's done in all age groups. So we have 16 clinical sites that are going to conduct this trial, 8 of which will be pediatric sites and 8 of which will be adult sites, and we're going to seek an indication in all age groups from the beginning. I'm a parent of a kid who was an infant with type 1 diabetes, so I'm particularly sensitive, to clinical trials and devices and drugs that come out only in adults and then years later are made available to kids. And that diabetes isn't one of those situations. Kids are affected by diabetes, as we all know. And whereas 85% of people with type 1 are adults, it's a disease that goes after young people. And so we want to make sure there's a device out there for them just as soon as there's a device out there for adults. So we're going for indication for all ages, and our clinical trial will enroll all ages. The study I was talking about for the insulin-only, what we call bridging study for the iLet that we're going to conduct this year, will enroll children down to 6, so adults and children 6 years and above. But the pivotal trial, which we do next year, will enroll all ages.
Have you already enrolled the people for this year's trial? Can they sign up? Can people where can people go to learn more about that?
No, you can't enroll people until you have IRB approval. And so the Institutional Review Board has to review the clinical protocol and has to approve it. And then at that point, you can begin screening and enrolling subjects. But we don't have IRB approval yet, but we did have a great meeting in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago with the Data Safety and Monitoring Board. That is our Data Safety and Monitoring Board with the NIH and with the folks from the Jaeb Center for Health Research, who is the national coordinating center for our studies and many other artificial pancreas studies that are going on out there. And so we had a meeting with the Jaeb Center, the NIH, and our Data Safety and Monitoring Board. Stephen Russell and I did a couple of weeks ago in D.C., and it was a very productive meeting. And the purpose of that was to review the protocol in front of them. Specifically, we spent much of our time talking about the insulin-only bridging study that we're going to be doing this year. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to get that protocol finalized in the next few weeks and submitted to the IRBs this summer, before this summer, hopefully. So that'll take a little bit of time. It takes a few weeks for the IRBs to look at it, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. So hopefully by the middle of this year we'll have IRB approval, or by the midsummer time.
Cool.
Or end of summer.
So you mentioned that you did not expect to have to build the whole thing soup to nuts, as you said. The idea here was to find maybe other people who already had equipment or other things to use. But I think this is a good chance to talk about your company, because not only did you not expect to have to build this, I can't imagine you expected to create a very unique company as you did. Can you tell us a little bit more about Beta Bionics? What makes this so unique? Because as I understand it, there's nothing else really like it.
Yeah, you're right about that. So, the technology is really disruptive, right? We're building a technology that is really different from anything that's come before it in important and fundamental ways that will change dramatically and improve access to the technology. That is what I think Beta Bionics is all about. It's being able to build a business plan, a business model together with a technology that's harmonized with the technology. And what makes it disruptive is that anyone can use it, and anyone who does gets good control. So it doesn't discriminate against people, whether you see a family practitioner for your care or an endocrinologist. It doesn't discriminate against the providers who would prescribe it. Family practitioners, pediatricians, internists, endocrinologists will be able to prescribe this device more easily than multiple daily injection therapy. It will have less effort. It will be less of a challenge for them to use this device on their patients, to recommend it for their patients, and they'll get better clinical outcomes with less follow-up. No technology that controls glucose like what we have been able to demonstrate through our clinical trials has ever been able to offer that. It typically comes at more complexity and more challenges and more interaction between the subject and the device. Ours does the opposite. And that, to me, is what the definition of innovation is all about. It's about building technologies which are far and away better than the current status quo, that can do better than the very best person can do with standard, status quo technologies. And everybody can enjoy that benefit equally well. That's a true innovation, and that's what we're trying to do with the Bionic Pancreas. So we've been extremely ambitious in the design of this, a system that is as autonomous as you can imagine a device like this could be. You still need to change the insulin cartridges, and you have to change the infusion sets and the tubing, and you have to change the sensor and calibrate it. I'm not suggesting all of that isn't a nuisance. It is. The Bionic Pancreas is by no means an elegant solution. But when it comes to glycemic management, when it comes to controlling blood sugar, it truly is autonomous. It's a system that does not require input beyond your body weight. It doesn't require even that you interact with the device beyond maintaining it and making sure the batteries are charged and the cartridges are full, the infusion sets are changed and sensors then changed properly. But it's a system that does not require that you make decisions about your glycemia, that the provider know anything about your total daily dose of insulin or basal rates or carb to insulin ratios. So that kind of a system, that kind of an innovative system that's that autonomous and can reach that many people needs a business model that allows for that exploits that technology and can freely bring it to as many people, as many underserved people, as well as people who have good access to modern medicine, to endocrinologists and so forth. We're going to be able to bring it to everybody as effectively as possible. And that includes people who have what's called these orphan conditions, people who have chronic hypoglycemia, congenital hyperinsulinism, insulin-only syndrome, post-bariatric surgery patients, people who have rare disorders of excessive insulin secretion that cause chronic hypoglycemia. These are orphan diseases that don't have a lot of attention brought to them. There's not a lot of companies that are willing to put time and resources into building solutions for those kinds of conditions, and they need tremendous attention. They're small in number, but their problem is enormous. And so we think by the virtue of the business model that we've designed, we'll be able to do those things freely without the burdens of thinking continuously about returning equity to shareholders. We started Beta Bionics as a benefit corporation. And most people have not heard of benefit corporations for a very good reason. They've only been around for about a half a dozen years in this country. So the states did not have benefit corporation laws on their books until about 2010. Maryland introduced the benefit corporation laws in 2010. And in the 6 years following that, some 30 states have now instituted benefit corporation laws, Massachusetts being one of them, including New York and California and Illinois and now Delaware. They all have benefit corporation laws. So the majority of U.S. states have these laws, and they differ from state to state. But the important thing to realize is that a benefit corporation is a for-profit entity. And as a benefit corporation, you still can capitalize the company in the same way you can with a traditional C Corp. You can raise venture capital if you want. You can raise private equity investments. You can raise money through investors. You have shareholders. So the corporate structure, and you pay taxes to the federal government in the same way you do the C Corp. But for the benefit corporation, you have additional layer of state provisions, state laws, that allow you, in fact, oblige you to articulate a benefit mission for your company. It's built right into the Articles of Incorporation and the corporate bylaws. And as a company, and then, of course, as I said, it varies from state to state. In Massachusetts, you have to have a benefit board member on your board of directors. And optionally, you can have a benefit officer. We have one of each. We have a benefit director in Jeff Hitchcock, who started the Children with Diabetes organization, as you know. And then we have a benefit officer, Ed Raskin, is father of Max, who has type 1 diabetes. He's our benefit officer. And we have a benefit mission that we've articulated in our corporate bylaws, our Articles of Incorporation. We serve that mission. The board of directors and our benefit director make sure that we are meeting that obligation, and then the management team carries that out. But we are allowed to prioritize our benefit mission over and against returning equity to shareholders. Profitability no longer needs to be the single sole most important objective of the company because it's not a traditional C Corp. We're protected under Massachusetts state law to do that. So we can prioritize things that might not always maximize profits. We're allowed to take the long view and not have to have a 10x return on investment in 5 years. That is not the pressing issue for us. We want to be a sustainable organization. We want to be an organization that is acting in the public good, in the best possible interest of people with type 1 diabetes. And short of a nonprofit corporation, really most other corporate structures can't say they can do that because they can be sold out, the company can be flipped to turn a profit. The investors can really drive the priorities of the company and completely change those priorities as they see fit. We have this benefit mission that is our first and foremost obligation, and we have not raised any money from venture capital or private equity. Instead, we formed strategic partnerships. When you and I last spoke, we had received a $5 million investment from Lilly. Since then, we've done a $1 million equity crowdfunding raise under the new Jobs Act regulations, regulation crowdfunding. So some 700 accredited and unaccredited investors bought little pieces of Beta Bionics, and we sold off $1 million of the company. And also, since we last spoke, Novo Nordisk has invested $5 million in Beta Bionics. So now we have a board member from Lilly and a board member from Novo Nordisk on our board of directors. There's no medical device company, private, for-profit medical device company I'm aware of in the diabetes space that has both Novo Nordisk and Lilly sitting on their board. There's no medical device company, as far as I know, in the diabetes space, or perhaps in any other space, that is both a public benefit corporation like we are, as well as a certified B Corp. So also, since we last spoke in At the end of this year, we received certification from B Lab, and we are now a certified B Corp, which is different from a benefit corp. B Lab is a nonprofit, and it runs a independent, objective evaluation of companies, whether they be benefit corporations or nonprofits or for-profits, to see that they are serving a benefit mission, that they are doing social good with their companies. And if you rise to a sufficiently high standard, which is non-trivial, you get this independent certification, kind of like certified fair organic or certified fair trade you see on food products. We are certified B Corp, as well as a benefit corporation, as well as a company that's done a very successful regulation crowdfunding raise. We raised $1 million in 12 weeks. I think it was the fastest raise to $1 million. That is all you can raise in regulation crowdfunding in a year. I think we were the first company to hit that milestone, and we did it in 12. We were the first to hit the milestone, and we did it in 12 weeks. So there's a lot of interest out there in Beta Bionics, and partly I think it's because we are really able to write our own ticket. We're able to drive our own agenda, which is articulated in our benefit mission. And our strategic partners in Lilly and Novo Nordisk see the value in this. And the way I look at it is our technology platform, the iLet, is the best way to deliver insulin and glucagon safely and effectively. And it's something that makes a great drug better. So we deliver insulin better than any other technology has been shown to do. And if you are Big Pharma who sells this drug, and you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different ways to deliver it, you would like to get as many of your patients on the best, most effective, and safest delivery platform as possible, and that's what the iLet offers. So I think we are mission aligned in that respect, and that's why our relationships with them are strategic in nature, and we describe them as strategic partners. Very different kind of investment relationship than a venture capital, venture capitalist or private equity investor.
When you have a company like that, and you have the support that you have, you're still so small, though. Everybody seems to be very concerned about how the smaller players are going to deal with Medtronic. They are launching their hybrid closed loop later this year. Some people already have it. It's obviously not the same device as what we've been talking about. But I did get some questions from listeners, and one of them was, how are you planning to take on Medtronic? Is that a fair question?
It is, but I'd rather not talk about that. I think it's not. You want to talk about your strategy to a certain extent. If you show your hand completely to those that don't want you to succeed, that's not in the best interest of people with type 1 diabetes, right?
I think the idea that you have a plan is what we need to know.
We do, and so what I will say is this. Of course, if you're a small player in this space, you have that's fraught with many disadvantages. But it does come with certain important advantages, and that coupled with creativity, an incredibly energized small team, right, who's willing to work round the clock to bring something like this to market, offers certain important, distinct advantages. In particular, we are extremely nimble, we are extremely agile, and we can bring much more innovative technologies forward much faster and at a way lower cost. And that's the thing that I think impresses our partners, our strategic partners, is what we can do with $10 million. What we do with $10 million is a lot. And I'd like to compare what we get done with $10 million to some of these big med tech companies on $100 million. I'd love to see if you would map what $100 million does for some of the big med tech companies compared to what we do with 10. And I think you'd be blown away by how effective we are. We're using our resources incredibly efficiently, and we are incredibly agile. We have a small number of decision makers in this company. And what happens when these companies get too large is they become mired in too many decision makers, in too much bureaucracy, and essentially layers of administration interfere with what the company is supposed to be all about, which is to deliver the best technology to people with type 1. And in fact, many of these companies aren't dedicated to that. They're dedicated to their profit line. Right? So the reality is that you could argue that a company that's prioritized making the best technology available to people with type 1 diabetes in as expeditious a manner as possible and isn't prioritizing return of equity to shareholders as its highest priority is nevertheless adding more value to their shareholders, perhaps than anything else they can do, because it's a company that's going to build the best technology, and it's going to have the most desirable technology among those who would want to use it. You're truly putting the consumer, all of your customer segments first. And that's what we do. And if we are true to that commitment, we will ultimately prevail. Now, it's not going to be easy. There's a tremendous complexity in the different market segments, the different sort of customer segments that we have to consider. The payer, the provider, and the patient. And the amount of effort we have to put in is enormous, and how much more falls on the shoulders of a small number of individuals is profound. But if you build the right team, and you can take advantage of your smallness and of your nimbleness and agility to bring way better technology that people are going to far and away prefer to what the current state of the art is. We just move fast, and we move effectively. And I should also mention that we have, since you and I last spoke, we've grown the company now to 14 employees, and we have 2 operations, Beta Bionics East in Boston and Beta Bionics West now in Irvine, California. So in the Irvine office, we have Ed and Serafina Raskin on the business development and the general counsel side, as well as a number of new engineers that we brought on. Our VP for R&D is over there, along with one of our senior program managers, and our laboratory space for doing laboratory testing of the Bionic Pancreas is all going to be based out of Irvine, California, and our director of quality assurance is out there as well. On the East Coast, we have software systems, we have graphical user interface development, we have algorithm development in Beta Bionics East in Boston. We have all of our clinical and regulatory running out of that office, which is, of course, near the FDA, quick 1-hour flight down to the FDA. So we have a distributed company, and we go to where the talent is. So rather than requiring people to relocate to Boston or relocate just to Southern California, we can cast a broader net, and we can bring the company to where the talent is, and that opens up many more opportunities. And we have built a remarkable team of engineers who have tremendous experience in the medical technology industry, and have shown through their efforts in the past 6 to 8 years tremendous success in this very space. So this isn't their first rodeo. They have learned a lot. They have some war wounds to show for it, and they've got tremendous success to show for it as well. So we think we are building a great team, and we'll continue to do so. But again, we're controlling costs because we're remaining small, and at the same time, we're pulling together the right people who can deliver on, a huge amount of work, because it's a labor of love for everybody that we're bringing on board. It really is something they can believe in, and they know that it's not going to be sold out, and it's not going to be minimized, which is something that always worries me about technologies that are licensed off to these larger companies that aren't as motivated for the same reasons we are, that don't have skin in the game, as I like to say, don't have personal connections with type 1 diabetes, and that are prioritizing the bottom line over all of the considerations. That's not mission aligned with the type 1 diabetes community very often. Sometimes, but not always.
Yeah. As we see, there's a couple of companies right now with some questions about the future. It's a little scary. Let me ask you a couple quick questions about the technology before I let you go here. One of the questions I had from a listener was about the target with the iLet, the A1C, the blood glucose range. And if you could answer that as well by talking about, you mentioned a while back that all you do is put your weight in. I think many people are looking at these devices, like we mentioned, the Medtronic hybrid closed loop, where you still put in your carbohydrate count, you adjust different things. Can you talk a little bit about really the practical workings and then what the goals are in terms of A1C?
Sure. So the other devices that are out there and are being proposed that I've heard about all are built on the backbone of an insulin pump philosophy, right? That you start with an insulin pump and you add algorithms that take configurations that you would populate with your insulin pump, your basal rates, carb to insulin ratios, carb correction factors, and then you would start from there, and then the device would modulate the insulin infusion rate around those preset parameters. Now, who can set those parameters? Typically, endocrinologists are brought to bear, and diabetologists are brought to bear on determining those initial profiles, and then the device modulates it around that. And those devices are, I suspect, I've not seen any data other than ours that shows how well those would be able to adjust themselves as somebody goes through a significant change or stage of life change where they go from prepubertal to pubertal. So as soon as you start needing huge amounts of insulin, are those systems really going to work, or do you have to go back to the endocrinologist and iterate again on the basal rates? I haven't seen a trial that shows the same system configured in a simple, objective way, besides ours, that adapts automatically. And so our system is one that requires none of that information, none of the specialty knowledge that an endocrinologist or a diabetologist would need to bring to bear on configuring the system and perhaps even following up and iterating on that, but rather a system that is initialized with a simple and objective piece of information, your body weight, which is readily obtainable. From the very beginning, and I'm talking about 2005 now, when we started our first pig experiments in October of 2005, I was committed to this idea. My partner in crime, Firas El-Khatib, was committed to this idea that the system should be that simple, it should be turnkey, and it should robustly adapt. Now, when we started this back in 2005, we didn't know exactly how we were going to make the system so robust. We faced that challenge for the first time in 2010 in human clinical trials when we got to see what adolescents were all about. And we got to see what they could do. And that did require a lot of work on our part to revisit the entire design. And we made some fundamental changes to a system that was working well in adults but not well in teenagers. And if we made it working well in teenagers, it was too much insulin for adults. So we sort of went back to the drawing board with some of the fundamentals that worked well with the system in adults, and we kept that to the extent that we could. And then we added a lot of adaptability and built that into the system. And that system we found in our 4 clinical trials that we did between the first outpatient studies that we did between 2013 and 2015. We've done more since then, but the 4 that have so far been published show there's no difference in the quality of control we get in the teenage population versus the preteen population versus the adult population. That in and of itself is remarkable, so long as you add the caveat that the control is spectacular in all 3 of those categories. So we have, what we've shown is the average glucose level in each of those 3 populations is a blood sugar around 140 mg per deciliter, plus or minus, I think in the preteens it was like 137, in the teens it was like 142 or 143, in the adults it was like 141 mg per deciliter. That all comes into an A1C of about 6.5%, independent of the population, with hypoglycemia less than 1% of the time, or between 0.5% of the time and 1.32 or 1.3% of the time. And even when in the higher instances of hypoglycemia, which was still quite low, correspond to something like 15 minutes out of the day, below 60. That's in an extremely active, challenging summer camp environment. It's remarkable to achieve that kind of an average glucose level in preteens and teens and only visit blood glucose levels below 60 mg per deciliter about 15 minutes out of the day. Yeah. And even when that happened, it happens with the device having turned insulin off potentially an hour earlier, and it's proactively dosing glucagon. So you've got a system that is significantly ameliorating serious risk of hypoglycemia. Mild hypoglycemia is certainly not eliminated, but you are dramatically reducing the risk of severe hypoglycemia because you're proactively treating it as it's happening or preemptively preventing it. In physically active situations like summer camp, we would expect, even with a bihormonal system, slightly more hypoglycemia. And what we see is something like 16, 17 minutes out of the day on average, below 60. And again, Still, it's proactively treating it and addressing it, unlike standard insulin therapy right now, where if you're hypoglycemic and you drop below 60 mg per deciliter, you might not know it until it's too late. So this device is busy and hard at work trying to restore that situation to normal glycemia every 5-minute step. Again, what we're seeing is a system that is in all those scenarios, the preteen population, the teen population, the adult population, we're truly using the same device, initialized with the same piece of information. When the device starts on that very first step with body weight, it doesn't know that this 150-pound teenager needs 90 units of insulin and this 150-pound man needs 35. Yeah. It doesn't know that, right? It figures that out automatically and quickly within about a day or so. And then that's it. It doesn't need to continue to keep running in and relearning you every day. It learns that in the first day or so, and then it just carries on and adapts to your ever-changing needs. So it's always adapting as it needs to your changing needs. It's adaptable to you, not the other way around. All other diabetes technologies I'm aware of that I've ever seen and used with my kid are so limited that you must adapt your behavior to the device because the devices can't do that much for you. They're just not up to the task. And so you're accommodating the limitations of the device. And here we're developing a device technology that is accommodating to you and adjusting itself, respecting the fact that today you need a third more insulin than you needed yesterday. And I don't know why. I don't care. I make no judgment. I'm just a device. I'm just going to give it to you because that's what your body's asking for.
It's amazing. All right. I have to ask you a question that might cause you and some of my listeners to roll their eyes. And that is, Many people are eager for a system that will let them get their blood sugar to, let's say, a target of, 80 or 90, or adults some of whom are using the open APS system, some of the do-it-yourself stuff that's out there. And when they hear that the target might be 140, which to me as a parent of a teen, I'm like, hallelujah, let's get this stuff out here. A1C 6.5 is like holy grail, but they want it lower. Is this something that can be adjusted?
Only to a certain extent. We are not willing to make the device aggressive enough so that you could bring your average glucose down to 80 or 90. It's not at all clear that that's even needed physiologically, right? Most people without diabetes don't have an average blood sugar of 80 or 90 mg per deciliter. I think it's closer to more like 100 in the first place. People without type 1 diabetes do not have a flat blood sugar, okay?
Right.
And I think that's a bit of a myth out there that everybody without type 1 diabetes just sort of sits there at 100. People without type 1 diabetes can eat a bagel, 80 grams of carbohydrates and see their blood sugar go to 200 and come back an hour and a half later to 100. So it isn't that people without type 1 aren't having glycemic excursions and glycemic variability. It's much less than people with type 1, of course. But people without diabetes have variation in glucose levels. So you have to be careful about too much perfectionism, right? And trying to do something that even without diabetes, people can't achieve or don't achieve, their bodies don't achieve. But to people who want an average blood sugar of 80 or 90 mg per deciliter, our device isn't the device for them. They need to use their own technology and work really, really hard at that. And what I will guarantee is even those very same people, if they were using the technologies available to them today and we're shooting to get an average glucose of 140, we'll have less hypoglycemia with the bionic pancreas, the bihormonal bionic pancreas, than they will. So our study subjects do much less work, right? They exert much less effort, cognitive effort, maintaining their blood sugars because they're not maintaining it on the bionic pancreas, and get far better results in terms of mean glycemia and hypoglycemia than can be achieved with standard of care practices. Now, if you take somebody who's really an uber user of these open APS systems and they can add insulin and they have a lot more control over the insulin dosing, they can bring their average glucose down for sure below what the bionic pancreas will be willing to achieve, and they'll do it at the price of more hypoglycemia. No question in my mind that's going to be the case. And that's what we've been seeing. So it's hard to beat the bionic pancreas on both fronts. Bringing your average blood sugar down is not without its cost. And the DCCT trial showed us that intensive insulin therapy can bring a cohort's average A1C down to 7%. But that drop in A1C is in inverse proportion to an increase in hypoglycemia. It's inescapable for the population at large. We're building a device for as many people as possible. If there's a very small percentage of the population that seeks even better, or I shouldn't say better control, but lower average glucose levels at the price of more hypoglycemia, that's for them to do and to expend a great amount of cognitive energy trying to achieve that every day and every night. We're not building a system for that. That is not our goal. Our goal is to bring people down to A1Cs of 7 or below. It's been our insulin-only system, we think, would achieve a mean A1C of about 7%, between 7 and 7.5%, but I think closer to 7 based on our clinical data that we produced in collaboration with our clinical collaborators at MGH and Stanford, but with more hypoglycemia than the bihormonal system. The bihormonal system can lower the average glucose level without increasing hypoglycemia because instead of increasing hypoglycemia, it adds a little bit of glucagon. We're talking about a system that can, if you bring the vast majority of people with our bihormonal system under an A1C of 7%, it's been shown time and again through clinical trials that there's no signal for microvascular damage below an A1C of 7%. So there is a signal for macrovascular damage as you reduce the A1C further below that, but you get to a point of diminishing returns. Right. So there's very little incentive to try and make a system that does substantially better than an A1C lower than 7%. There are several guidelines out there. The ACE guidelines a little lower, saying we should be targeting 6.5%, and the ADA guidelines would like to see people under 7. But the reality is if you take a randomly sampled group of people and get an average glucose of 154 mg per deciliter, that's in that random sample on their own care, which is an A1C of 7%, you'll find hypoglycemia, glucose levels below 60 mg per deciliter, we found over an hour of the day. Wow. And those are glucose levels where they may or may not be paying attention, being able to. So our clinical collaborator at MGH did such a study. He wasn't looking for that as a primary outcome, but it was, the data revealed. Retrospectively, we looked at those data and we said, wow, the average time below 60 mg per deciliter was 68 minutes out of the day in a cohort that achieved a mean glucose of 154 mg per deciliter. Now, that cohort was hypoglycemic unaware, so they were chosen to be hypoglycemic unaware deliberately. So that number might be a little bit higher than what you would see in the population at large. But nevertheless, there's a lot of hypoglycemia going on out there. If you're trying to achieve an A1C of 7%, that's the price you have to pay. It's inescapable. And our device is protecting against that and achieving slightly better A1C or achieving better average glucose levels than that. And that would presumably correspond to improvement in A1C.
This whole thing started with your son, and you've mentioned him a couple of times. David he was an infant, right? He was younger than 1 year old when he was diagnosed?
Yeah, just barely. He was 11 months old, yeah.
And how he's going to college in the fall, as you said. How is he doing, if we can get just a little bit personal, because he's why this whole thing started.
He is why I got involved in this. And I was not working in this area when my wife diagnosed him, and my first attention to it soon after he was diagnosed, within weeks after it, I started to learn about continuous glucose monitors, but that was 17 years ago. It was 2000. So it was really before they made their debut, minimally invasive continuous glucose monitoring. And I was thinking about a dual hormone approach to controlling blood sugar with some kind of a continuous glucose monitor, having some perhaps unreasonable but faith in the idea that maybe just naive faith that non-invasive or minimally invasive continuous glucose monitoring was in the very near future. So I wanted to work on a control system that would do this. And one of my students, Firas Al-Khatib, was sort of ready and waiting for a good project. And we were doing certain things in my lab together, but I don't think they were his real passion. But this was something he latched onto and got to work on, and that became the substance of his PhD thesis. But that's going back quite a long time. I did have an eye on college, though, from a very early period after he was diagnosed, because, we were able to do a very good job, my wife and I, taking care of David with an insulin pump and a finger stick meter. And by 2008, with the Abbott Navigator and an insulin pump, and in 2012 with the Dexcom and an insulin pump. But it's a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work. It's still not as good as the control we're going to get with Bionic Pancreas in terms of also reducing hypoglycemia. But I was always worried about what's going to happen when he's not in our care. Is he going to be able to take care of himself? And I was most concerned about the nighttime. And I wasn't sure, with all this care we're giving him and all this work we were doing, is he going to figure this out? And at some level, I was saying he doesn't need to, because we're going to build this device and it's going to take care of him. And he's going to go off to college with this device. And while I think most of his college years will have either the insulin-only or the bihormonal system available to him, not all of his time at college will now. It's very clear to me. But how is he doing managing his own diabetes? A 17-year-old kid, you'd expect he's taking over more of the responsibility. Well, he has done just that. And over the past few years, it's been sort of an organic process. I've watched him take more and more responsibility for his own care, and he does a great job.
That's great.
As he goes back from being superhuman to human and goes from using 90 units of insulin to 40 or whatever he's going to settle into after his teenage years, we're going to have to go through that transition together, unless I'm hoping by then he'll be on the Bionic Pancreas. But if he starts to do that really soon, that's scary because he's got these high basal rates, 1.2 to 1.5 units an hour. That's what a racehorse would need, not a human.
I call those elephant doses.
Exactly, absolutely. You need a bigger cannula.
Right.
So he's just picked this up organically over the years. I'm very reluctant to scare him, saying it's right around the corner, this independence you're about to face, and it's all going to fall on you. We don't have those kinds of conversations. He's taking over more and more responsibility himself, and the only thing that's sort of left in the wings here for us to concern ourselves with, I feel like, based on what I've seen him able to do throughout the day, is those nighttime periods where he's unconscious, and he's a deep sleeper. He's a good teenage boy. And, what's going to happen there? So that's really what I was always foremost in my mind, not knowing how well he was going to be able to rise to the occasion. Well, he's risen to the occasion very well. I've been very impressed with the responsibility he's taken. But it still doesn't close the door to all of my concerns, because the night times are lurking at the end of every day.
Yeah.
And, we have the remote monitoring. So, I'm hoping we can figure out ways that I can take care of him at night when he's at college, or help him, support him take care of himself at night. But the reality is, when you're unconscious, you can't take care of yourself because you're checked out.
Yeah.
You're unconscious, And so, and that's as it should be, right? So, and then you start worrying about disrupting your sleep. So I'm hoping he won't have too long at college without an iLet. And I suspect he won't unless something goes very wrong.
Yeah.
But if all continues to go as planned, he'll be wearing one of these systems very soon. But we do have to, think about this, and that's kind of what has been motivating. That is exactly what's been motivating me for this project since we took it on. He is going to Boston University, I'm happy to say, in September, in 5 months.
Wonderful.
So he'll be a history major, like his big sister, who's a rising junior there. So they followed in my footsteps exactly, both history majors.
Oh, wow.
And no, I was not a history major. I was an engineer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't think you, but going to Boston is so nice. They're right there.
It's very nice. And, of course, it's also very cost-effective because I'm a professor there, so their education is quite a bit reduced. Their tuition is dramatically reduced because of that. That's very nice. But they really did want to go to BU. I did not twist their arms to do that. In fact, David refused to apply to any other school. I tried to encourage him to throw a broader net. He wouldn't. He didn't apply to any other school but BU. At least they know that if they're going to be history majors, we better not come out with a lot of debt, because it's not the most practical degree. But it's an extremely important one as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah.
More history majors, not fewer.
So when you keep you said you hope that David will have the iLet by, perhaps sophomore year. I know that in this community, I have learned in the last 10 years to never put a date on anything, but the ballpark date possibly for iLet FDA approval, maybe late 2018, early 2019. What would you might hazard a guess?
Would be my goal. That's exactly where I would put it. And you're right. You typically don't put dates on things. We do because we want to hold ourselves accountable to it. And even if the date slips, at least we were totally transparent and honest about what our intent was. And if we don't achieve it, that's just the reality of the situation. There's no excuse for it. There's explanation. It's not an apology. It's an explanation for why. What we initially had hoped would happen, it became clear to me, was not possible. Building a bunch of algorithms and licensing it off to med tech is not the right way to do this. That was my initial intent. I am so glad I didn't do that. I've seen many technologies fall through the cracks with exclusive license deals to big med tech companies, and that technology never saw the light of day. Other companies will license technology, or they'll collaborate with technology, other companies' technologies, and one or the other doesn't make it off the starting blocks. The business fails. And, you're left holding the bag, and you went down this long road with a company that didn't have the means or the wherewithal to do it, and you're left holding the bag. So I just didn't see the small med tech companies and the big med tech companies each had their own challenges and threats or risks to our technology if we had partnered with them. And I was very open to both approaches, and I pursued one and then the other. And I think we did our due diligence there, and we came to the right conclusion, I believe, to do this ourselves. But it's an enormous undertaking to build a Class 3 medical device that is without precedent. That's not trivial. And I'm learning a great deal every day about what goes into building a system like this. And very many things that I'm learning, no one's ever learned before, right? Because it's not been done. That's what it is to be unprecedented. Many of the things I'm learning are known to many people, and I have to figure them out along with the rest of our team. But, we're hoping that what is known out there, we can bring into our knowledge base and our experience set, and what's not known, we're going to have to invent. What's uninvented, we need to invent, and what exists out there, we need to become knowledgeable of it as quickly as possible and as responsibly as possible. So, it's a big challenge, and it impacts timelines. And the other thing I'll emphasize is that this bridging study I want to do this year with the iLet that I was talking about, the first home-use outpatient study of the iLet, the purpose of that study is a test run of an entirely new platform, a dual-chamber pumping platform with integrated CGM, integrated algorithms. It's a whole new device. It's never been tested. And there's no way we're not going to run an outpatient clinical trial and not learn things from that study that will want us to make changes to the system, either to the hardware platform, to the little consumables, to the software platform. That's the purpose of that trial, is to uncover things that we don't like about it. We'll like to learn things that we do like about it, hopefully things we expect to see, we'll see. But if we see things that we don't like, our intent is to fix it before we lock the design and go into a pivotal trial. If that delays the start of the pivotal trial by 3 or 4 months, so be it. That's totally reasonable. That's the reason we're doing this feasibility study, is to learn in a practical way. We have great resources. The NIH has funded this little bridging study along with the pivotal trial for this purpose, to really test this system in a small scope, 40-subject study where each subject wears the device for 2 weeks, so that we can see how it works in the real world and have an opportunity to make improvements to it before we lock the system down and go into a large-scale national pivotal trial. So if it further delays the timeline, that would be for a good reason.
Right.
Hopefully it won't significantly impact it, though.
Well, Ed, I really appreciate your time. You let us go way over the limit that we had planned with you, and I so appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I can't wait to talk to you again and find out how it's all going. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stacey. I really appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information on Beta Bionics, on the Bionic Pancreas, the iLet, and how you can get on their list. If you'd like to find out more about clinical trials coming up, they have an About You tab. They have About Us and they have About You on their website. So I will link that up at diabetes-connections.com. And also, Ed Damiano mentioned that DCCT study, and that went by pretty quickly. I wanted to point that out if you're not familiar, and I will link this up as well. This is the Diabetes Control and Complications Trial. It was done in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and it was an incredibly important turning point in diabetes management and what doctors knew about diabetes, because it's the first to show that keeping blood sugar levels as close to normal as possible slows the onset and progression of diseases, eye disease, kidney, nerve disease caused by diabetes. It showed that any sustained lowering of blood sugar helps, even if the person has a history of higher blood sugars. So to us, right here, more than 20 years later, we think, well, of course. But at that time, it wasn't clear at all that tighter control would make a difference. So this was huge. And if you're not familiar with it, people say DCCT a lot in the medical professional community. I'll link that up and you can look at it and see, really, it's a lot of before and after. Amazing to think about how long ago that was when I talk about it, at least to me, and my middle age, it seems like it was just yesterday that it was the late 1980s, 1990s. I get so excited when I talk to Ed Damiano or when I talk to the people from Bigfoot, or even hear more about the hybrid closed loops that all the pump companies are working on. Been in this world for 10 years. I've covered diabetes issues since the 90s as a health reporter. That's how I started out in television news. And I've said this before in the show. I sometimes fear I have grown cynical over time, but I have let myself just a little bit get more and more hopeful over the past 2 years. Not necessarily for a cure, although I do believe that will come someday In Benny's lifetime, I don't know. But there's a lot of great, smart people working on that. But when I think about something like this Bionic Pancreas with the iLet that would take the mental burden away, it's not changing the cartridge. It's not changing the inset that gives my son a hard time. It's the constant remembering and the thinking and the doing. And if we could relieve that burden for people with type 1 and for the people who love them, it would be absolutely amazing. So yeah, I guess I'm letting my hope creep up a little bit again. And I hope it pays off. All right. So that's the 100th regularly scheduled episode of Diabetes Connections. Wow. I'm so excited to see what the next 100 will bring. Maybe at episode 200, we'll be talking about several competing systems that people can have to take away the mental burden, or new insulins, or, smart insulin, or so many exciting things that are coming. So I'd love for you to stick around for another 100 episodes. Let me know what you think. You can always contact me over social media or Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. The newsletter is something I hope you've already signed up for. If not, please do that. And like I always say, if you're listening on the website or on Facebook, that is great. But if you'd like more flexibility and portability with your podcasts, we are available on every single podcast app. And if you're not sure, please reach out. I'll walk you through it, because you know what? There are so many great podcasts out there, not just this one, that once you're in the world of podcasting, you're going to love it. And you can listen in your car, as you're walking the dog, doing the dishes. It's a great, great way to catch up on stuff. So there you go. I'm Stacey Sims. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.